I'm Sarina Fazan, taking a risk, making a difference, and changing the course of your life. Remarkable stories from people defying the odds. You're listening to On the Record. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarina Fazan, a journalist, producer, and the host of On the Record. Thank you so much for joining me for this podcast episode. I'm here with DeGregory, and if I am a bumbling idiot, it's because she's one of my absolute role models. We're ready to go on the record. Let's get started. DeGregory, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So, okay, I've been reading your articles for years and years, and A Girl in the Window is the one that won the Pulitzer Prize, and I want to talk about that, of course. But tell us about you. How did you get started?
Oh, so I'm one of those really weird people who knew what I wanted to do when I was like 6 years old. I grew up in Washington, D.C. during Watergate, so you can guess my age. I was in kindergarten, and my dad would read the Washington Post every morning to me and my sister while we were eating Cheerios. And he was very... journalists were heroes to him. You know what I mean? They were bringing down the president of the United States who did something egregious, and Woodward and Bernstein were like superheroes to my dad. And so I thought, even when I was 5 or 6, I liked to write, and I was like really nosy and like to, interview all kinds of people. And so I thought, I could be a writer, and I could break news, and I could bring down the president of the United States. So 6-year-old me decided that's what I wanted to do. And then other than babysitting, I've never had any jobs that weren't in newspapering. I did everything you could do in newspapering. So
you're kidding. Okay, so at 6 years old, when your dad's reading you these articles, even then you realize, though, the importance of what a journalist can do.
I just thought that was the coolest thing. Yeah, my mother was an English teacher, and so was very, interested in writing and all that stuff. But I never knew how you could make a living as a writer. And I thought, you could ask people any questions you wanted to, and then you could write it, and then thousands of people would read it. It wouldn't sit like an unpublished novel in a closet somewhere. It's like instant gratification because you write it one day and people read it the next. And my little self said, that's what I want to do. And my sister and I made a little newspaper in elementary school, and she took pictures, and I wrote the stories, and my dad would go Xerox at the library. And so it was like, it's always been who I am. And every time I think about what else do I want to do, I can't, because it's so entangled with my personality.
It's what you've always wanted to do.
Always. Yeah.
And I understand that too, because I've always wanted to be, a broadcast journalist. So tell me though, was your dad also in the profession? You said your mom is an English teacher.
Yeah, and then my dad was a nuclear physicist.
Nuclear physicist?
Yeah, he worked for the government, but he's a big consumer of news, so...
Okay, I think, honestly, you hear about nuclear physicists, but you're probably the first person that I know that actually has a member of their family or someone that's a nuclear physicist.
Yeah, I never knew what he did. I didn't really understand it. But.
So at 6 years old, you knew you wanted to be a journalist. So then what happened? I mean, how did you pursue it? Did you write for the school paper? What happened?
I did. So we started this little elementary school paper, and then in middle school, my mom helped and came and sponsored a little paper after school. And then I got really lucky and went to a public high school, but it was like a journalism magnet. So high school, our paper won the Gold Crown at Columbia my senior year. So it was very high end for high school. You know what I mean? And that's the type of journalism we were doing. We had 3 different people write a story, and whoever's story was best got printed. So it was competitive, which was kind of cool too.
Speaking of that, does it make you sad in a sense? And I don't mean to go all over the place, but, to be printed was such a big deal. And now things have changed so much.
Well, even just since COVID, our paper was still 7 days a week here at the Tampa Bay Times up until COVID. And now we're Wednesday and Sunday. And they make fun of me, the younger kids at the paper, because I'm like, I want to be in the print. I still really, really want to be in print. And they're like, who cares? Just share it and get it on Reddit. But I love going to the driveway and picking up the paper in the morning and seeing my stories. And I love... even in college, I went to the University of Virginia, and we had a daily paper in college. And even then, to go sit in the cafeteria in the morning and see, your classmates reading your stories, it was just such a rush for
I know,
me,
it's so great. Well, and I have to say, and I'm guilty of this, though, you guys work so hard. But the only byline really that I would notice was yours.
Aww,
DeGregory, I got to read this article. But
what a nice thing to say.
But it's the truth. I mean, it's the truth. And I introduced you, of course, as a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer, but also, yes, to note that you've worked with the Tampa Bay Times for how many years now?
20 years. This is my 20th year. Yeah.
Congratulations on that. So, okay, so you're in high school, you go to college.
Mm-hmm. I went to the University of Virginia because they were one of the only schools that had a daily newspaper and no journalism department. So the monkeys got to run the zoo. It was all undergrad students and a couple of med students and law students, but there was no professors professor. There was no advisor. So we just kind of got to I learned from the kids older than me. You know what I mean?
So that's why you chose the school, though. Mm-hmm. You chose that school specifically because they had a daily paper.
Because I interviewed a lot of people in high school. You know, I was that kind of like, where should I go to school? What should I major in? And all of the people, including broadcast journalists I talked to, said, you don't really need a journalism degree. You know, be smart, read a lot, talk to people, and then you can do journalism. And I was like, okay, that would be great. So I went to the newspaper office like before I even started classes. But there was no program, you know.
And you bring up such a good point, because I learned that too, that you don't necessarily need a journalism degree because you learn on the job, basically.
Absolutely.
And then if you can write and share stories, I mean, that's what it's all about. So what was your degree in?
English.
English.
And rhetoric. Probably the only person you've had on here who has a rhetoric degree,
yes.
too. So, and I went and got a master's in rhetoric, too.
Wow, I didn't even know there was such a thing as a rhetoric degree.
It's very archaic. I don't think the department even exists anymore.
So after college, so then what happened? Did you know, so here you are, you don't even live in the state of Florida, you know, but you take the story. So what happened after that?
Well, so I interned every summer in college from the University of Virginia, and mostly at Virginia and North Carolina papers. And then after I graduated, and then I went and got a master's degree, and then, which didn't really help, but then I got a job at the Virginian Pilot, was the Norfolk paper. So I worked there for about 10 years before I came to the Tampa Bay Times.
Wow. So what brought you to the Tampa Bay Times? Was it the position? Did they offer you a column? What happened?
That's a great question, because I would have stayed in Virginia. You know, I was in a bureau for the first 7 years, and then the newspaper formed what they called a narrative writing team, which kind of got us into doing longer term projects and more storytelling than covered news, you know. So I did news for the first 7 years, was writing 2 or 3 stories a day, you know, covering murder trials and fishing tournaments and city council meetings and stuff.
So kind of like a general assignment reporter.
Exactly.
Okay. So
in a bureau too.
In a bureau. Okay.
Yeah. And so then they posted this. I had just had my second child in 2 years, and they posted this sign that said, you know, would you rather sit down and talk to people than cover city council? Would you rather go out on a fishing boat than cover the fisheries hearing? And I was like, yes, that's exactly what I want to do. So I applied. They had 40 reporters apply, and they picked 4 of us. And that was sort of my transition from, you know, chasing news to telling stories. And then after 2 years in that position at Virginia, they were like, you are a young woman. We want you to be an editor. And I was like, I don't want to be an editor. I want to tell stories. Mm-hmm. And so the Virginian Pilot said, if you stay here, you need to be an editor. And the Tampa Bay Times, it was right when the beginning of the internet was happening, you know, 1999, 2000. And I saw a posting for the Tampa Bay Times hiring a feature writer. And so I applied for that and came here.
So to be an editor for a paper, even though it can be very prestigious, right? Could have been considered really a promotion.
Absolutely.
But you did not want to edit everybody else. You wanted to write.
Exactly. I couldn't even imagine myself sitting in meetings inside a building all day long, you know, and fixing other people's copy instead of making my own, you know.
Wow. So you see this advertisement for the Tampa Bay Times. Had you and your husband, and you guys have been married now for what, 27 years?
28 years.
28 years. Congratulations on that. And you have 2 amazing boys, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, 2 boys, yes. So, okay, so years ago, and your husband, you said, is in a band and a teacher. Right. So years ago, though, you look at this advertisement in the Tampa Bay Times. Had you guys ever been to Florida? Did you have any connection with Florida, or what happened?
My mom's from Miami, so I'd spent Christmases a lot down here. But my husband is from New Jersey and thought Florida was like, you know, Florida man. He did not want to come at all. And so I came down and interviewed, and then I kind of fell in love with St. Pete and Tampa and made him come down and check it out. But the kids were little. They weren't in school yet. They were 2 and 3 when we moved here. So it was easy to, you know, uproot them.
So I have one of the series, of course, this is the Incredible Stories from Inspiring Women series that we're doing, but I have Love in America as well. So speaking of you and your husband, did it take a lot of convincing to get him to come down here, or was he knew it was your passion and wanted to help fulfill your dream?
Kind of both. He wasn't working then. He was playing in all these bands, but he stayed home with the kids during the day. So I wasn't uprooting him from a job. You know, I just had to kind of convince him that there's a lot of bands in Tampa Bay. You know, you could come down here and play music. So he was very supportive. He's always been. When he met me, I was a journalist, so he knew what he was getting into.
No, I think that's so sweet. I think it's the secrets of a successful marriage is that you really have to be supportive, right, of your spouse's dream.
Right.
One of the many secrets of a successful marriage.
And then he ended up going on the road with the band for a couple years and left me home with the kids. So we took our turns,
That's awesome, though. So then you come here. You fell in love with Tampa St. P. As you said, you start with the Tampa Bay Times, and you start as a feature reporter.
Feature writer, yeah.
So feature writer. Do they give you the reins and say, hey, you go find your stories? Or what happened? Were you assigned certain types of stories?
Kind of both, some of both. We had a daily feature section back then, which was amazing, and then it went from being every day to 3 days a week to Sunday only to once a month magazine. So we had a lot more room to tell a lot more stories back then, And I guess maybe 75, 80% of my stories were my own ideas that I pitched, and then sometimes they would assign stuff. Like, I still have to cover news if there's a hurricane or the Republican convention or, stuff
right.
like that.
There's always...
everybody, all hands on deck, so I still do some of that. But most of the feature stuff are my ideas.
So how do you come up with your ideas? Is it through talking to people, or how do you find your amazing stories?
Yeah, a lot of it's just connections, in the community. My kids and my husband are always like, stop interviewing my friends, But I would chat up the moms at the Little League game or the grandmoms at the dance studio, or the hippies at the Grateful Dead band my husband was playing at, and just kind of let everybody know I'm a storyteller, and if you have a good story, hit me up. And I have friends who are bartenders, and I would leave my card with them because I know bartenders hear great stories. The girl who cuts my hair has given me stories, It's kind of like, I feel like, especially being a feature writer, you're kind of like a paramedic. Mm-hmm. You're always on call, right? There's always something out there that you can just grab onto. And if you go home and tell your husband or your best friend or your mom about something that happened, maybe there's a story there. You know what I mean? So I come up with way too many ideas. My editor has to help me cull them down.
No, I think that's so inspiring to hear, though, because people always used to ask me in a newsroom, how did you come up with your stories? And I said, so many times it's who you talk to, and that's where you get your story ideas. And of course, we have to cover the big news of the day, hurricanes, as you mentioned, or a big trial, or sadly the crime of the day. So what are your favorite types of stories to share?
I really like human interest stories about kids and adolescents. I think I would say are my favorite types of stories to write. I don't like writing about celebrities. I hate writing about celebrities because I feel like they're never going to be honest with you. Kids are so real. It's so, I feel refreshed, when I get to sit down on the floor with a kid and interview them. And I like stories, my editor will tell you that I like stories that have hope in them. I don't like stories for the sake of tragedy, just reliving an emotional voyeurism is, mm-hmm. I don't want to do those kind of stories, though sometimes I have to, but I want there to be some hope,
Some hope in the stories. So through the years too, and I guess it goes back to any job. When I started in my newsroom, here I was a cub reporter, but you gain respect, right? You came with a lot, I know, 10 years of experience from your other newspaper, but to be able to pitch whatever story you want to share, do you feel like they paid attention?
Yeah, I've been really blessed with great editors. I know not all editors are open and amenable to every idea, but I feel like I've had 3 main editors in my career, which is also a blessing in, mm-hmm. all these years. But I feel like they trust me enough to at least go, take a couple hours, report it out a little bit, make some phone calls, dicker around on the internet, see what there is there. At least they give me the opportunity to do that. Sometimes it comes up, they don't want me to do it, or it's not as interesting as I thought. You know what I mean? But I do feel like they've trusted me enough to at least give me a leash, to go out and look for it.
Well, you won a Pulitzer Prize for A Girl in the Window, and we're gonna take a quick break. But when we come back from the break, I want to talk about how you found that story, A Girl in the Window, and you won the prize in 2009.
Correct.
It's amazing. Okay, we'll be right back.
I'm Sarina Fazan. I don't know about you, but there are not enough hours in the day. Well, thanks to Zips, one less task on my to-do list. For only $3.49 per garment, they actually pick up my dry cleaning and drop it off. I get it the very next day. Just give them a call.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to On the Record. I'm here with DeGregory. She's a Pulitzer Prize-winning author and a writer, and also works with the Tampa Bay Times. Lane, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, okay, tell me about A Girl in the Window. First of all, that story, honestly, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe it. And it's such a sad story, but I always waited for the the next chapter. Can you just tell us about the story first?
Yeah, so when I came here, I did not have a beat. Usually at a newspaper or on TV, I'm sure you're the crime reporter or you're the cop reporter or you're city hall reporter. And I didn't have a beat. I was just feature reporter. So I was trying to find a foothold in things that we weren't covering, and we didn't really have a social services reporter at that time. So I was interested in foster care and adoption, and I reached out to the people from the Hillsborough Children's Board. They run the Heart Gallery. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes, absolutely.
So they basically, they take pictures of kids who are in foster care who need a family to adopt them, and then they put the pictures up at a video arcade or a church or somewhere like that. And so I'd worked with this woman, Carolyn Eastman, for a couple years on, hey, we're going to put the Heart Gallery up at the mall. Oh, hey, we're going to put the Heart Gallery up at the dog track or whatever. And I kept saying to her, it's great little news nuggets, but if you can find me a kid or a family from that group that I could zero in on, I feel like it's so much easier to make people care about one person than about 330 foster children in Hillsborough County, So rather than just giving a broad swath of look at all these needy kids, I wanted her to help me find either one family looking for a kid or one kid looking for a family. And we went back and forth. She was a great source. She was a really great source. And we went back and forth for 2 or 3 years. And then finally, I remember she called me. It was Super Bowl Sunday. And she was like, oh, my God, Lane, I think I have someone for you. She said, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've never seen a child like this. We have a feral child in the Heart Gallery this year.
It's giving me goosebumps all over. Okay.
And I'm like, what? I couldn't even wrap my brain around what that would mean in real life. All I could think of was Mowgli from the Jungle Book, or some kid Tarzan raised by apes. And I was like, what? How can that be in Tampa Bay? And so she started telling me the story, and it happened in Plant City. So it was kind of like a news desert. There was no newspaper there. There was no TV station there. There was no one checking the cop blotter, so no one had reported this case of this really extreme neglect. And the police had come because a neighbor called, and they rescued this little girl who'd been left in this horrible garage. She was 9 years old, which was the same age as my son at the time, so it hit really close to home right there for me. Yes. I'm at the mommy moment where I'm like, I feel guilty missing your Little League practice. And here this mother, her birth mother, had basically left her in a garage for all those years.
And can you describe the conditions the little girl was in? And the articles are amazing. I would encourage everybody to go back and read the articles. But can you describe what she was living in? Yeah,
we got really lucky because the police had taken 87 evidence photos. So we could actually see the room when they took her out. And she was on a mattress on the floor that was covered in bugs. There were snakes, there were rats, there were possums. The garage door didn't close all the way, so all these animals could come in under the bottom. She was in her own feces in a diaper. She was 9 years old. She couldn't talk. She couldn't walk. She couldn't eat solid foods. She was having a bottle of chocolate milk. She was emaciated. And the police took her immediately to the hospital, and she spent weeks at Tampa General while they tried to get her back to healthy again, and then they decided to put her up for adoption. So it was the question of who's going to adopt this child, right?
Right. So you took on that story, took on that case. How did you get access, though? Because oftentimes journalists, we don't. I know it, right. You're blocked and, no, you can't get this, you can't get that. How did you do it? How were you able to tell the story?
So I had been a reporter then for almost 20 years, I think, by the time I did that story. And I had never had somebody else broker my access for me. It was always me making a pitch. This woman from the Children's Board said, I don't think this family's going to... Okay, so they found this girl, they put her in the Heart Gallery, and then a family did come forward to adopt her. And they didn't think that the family would want to talk to me or share her story. So the lady from the Children's Board actually offered to take the social worker and me and the photographer and go down. The family lived in Fort Myers, so it was a 2-hour drive. So she offered to come with us and introduce us to this family in person and vouch for us as journalists. And that had never, ever happened in my career.
It's amazing.
It hasn't happened since.
It's amazing for something like that to happen, but it shows how much that social services director believed in the story and believed in you. Absolutely. To share this story and this message. And going back to what you said, that more people are going to care about the agency as a whole and about foster children as a whole if they can relate to a story, or they can feel something about a child. So, okay, please take it from there. So then you go and you meet her.
So and initially they didn't want us to do the story. They literally kept us on their porch, didn't want to invite us inside. We sat on the deck and talked to them for, I don't know, about an hour while Danny, her name's Danny, she kind of just ran around, and the social worker and the children's board worker were vouching for us, but also telling this family, who were very, very Christian, think of if you guys can take in this child who's so damaged, think of how that would inspire other people to take in other children. And you could be doing God's work by finding these children family. And all of a sudden you just saw, especially in the dad, the adoptive mother was still hesitant, but the dad was like, yes, I want to help other kids, and I think that pitch of we're not just telling Danny's sad story or her hopeful story because she did get rescued, but we're maybe telling people look, there's 300 other kids out there that need families and homes,
Did that couple have other kids as well?
Yeah, they had 4 boys. They had 4 sons.
Were they biological? I should have reread the articles prior.
No. So the mom had 2 sons. The dad had 1 son, and then they had another son together because it was their second marriage. And the little son was only a year older than Danny, so he was about the same age, William.
So your own son, as you said, was the same age as Danny. So when you are watching that and you're seeing this poor little girl, what was going through your mind as a mom?
Oh, me and the photographer both just wanted to kill the birth mother. I mean, seriously, we just were so angry watching the damage that had been done to this child, And I mean, for a photographer, it was kind of a dream because the girl didn't pay any attention to us whatsoever. We were not influencing the way she saw the world or interacting with us. So she just got to sort of document Danny, But it was heartbreaking. I mean, here's this little girl. She didn't know how to go to the bathroom. She didn't know how to. One of my favorite sentences in that story was she learned to chew ham. This 9-year-old girl who had never had solid food, and they had to teach her how to chew ham, And so it was, the process was, when we started out, there was so much hope. They all kept saying, all the doctors and the psychiatrists and speech therapists kept saying, maybe we got her in time. Maybe we caught her young enough that we can repair all this damage that's been done. So there was initially a lot of hope, and we followed her for about 6 months for that story, and did see, some progress during that time, but she didn't ever learn to talk.
And I was gonna ask you that next. How many stories did you do in total, or was it just
on Danny?
Yeah.
So the first one was 3 parts that I did in 2008, and then I did another one 3 years later in 2011, and then I did another one 10 years later. So that was in 2018.
So how is she doing? I mean,
well,
do you keep so oftentimes with journalists, we cover so many stories and we get so close to them, but we don't go back sometimes,
Yeah, she was always going to be in my heart, but it was hard because this family, they moved to Tennessee right after I wrote the story, so they weren't in Florida anymore, and they didn't have cell phones, and they didn't have email, they didn't have Facebook, and it was really hard to keep in touch with them. So, I tracked them down 3 years later, and it was also my son's growing up. So I know how old Danny is, and I'm watching his milestones. And when he was about to graduate high school at 18, I was like, holy cow, Danny's 18. I got to go back and find her now. I got to go back and figure out what happened to her. But the dad was he was very kind. I would call him on her birthday, and he would call me at Christmas. And, just a couple times a year, just sort of checking in, which made it nice.
Because I remember the stories of you trying to track her down as well. Okay, so let's go. So then you win, and I know you did it to share the message, which you did. You got so many people to care about more children. I mean, God knows how many children got adopted thanks to your story.
I know at least 3.
Oh, really?
Because they told the children's board lady, we saw the story, we came to adopt a child. So I don't know how many others, but yeah.
Oh my gosh, but to know that there were at least 3, that's amazing.
Isn't that the best thing ever?
Yes, because if you touch just one life, it makes everything worth it, right?
Right. And they got tons of donations to help with Danny. They were not a family of means, you know what I mean? So a lot of people reached out to help them too, which was cool.
I remember that. So now going to the Pulitzer Prize though, you weren't even, for lack of a better term, in the running, right?
I was not.
Okay. Oh my. Okay. So share how this story even got in front of the decision makers. What happened?
So the Times had nominate up to 3 stories per category. So they had nominated my story and then The Winter's Tale, which was this dolphin rescue story, a dolphin who lost his tail. And the dolphin story made it through. So the Pulitzer Prize thing happens in 2 stages, right?
And will you explain it? Because I think a lot of people, you hear, the Pulitzer Prize and everyone's like, oh my gosh, but if you could explain the process.
Yeah, and I didn't know how it worked either. I just was like, oh yay, they nominated me.
Exactly.
I didn't think I would ever win. I just thought, oh, how cool, I got nominated. So the first round of entries, which I think there's 1,400 entries or whatever per category, and they go to a panel of journalists. So editors and writers from across the country come together. I don't know how many people are in the jury. I don't know, a dozen or so who judged the initial one. And they pick the top 3 and then send those 3 onto the panel, which is all the arts. So it's musicians and composers and novelists and, photographers, and not just journalists. And so my story did not get sent as one of the top 3 picks.
Okay, I want you to repeat that. Your story did not N-O-T get picked as a top 3.
Did not get picked.
So you're thinking, okay, well, I'm out of the running.
Right, and I'm so excited for my friend John Barry, who sits next to me. I'm like, yay, John, I'm cheering for John, you know what I mean?
And he's the Winter Tale.
He's the Winter Tale, and he was a finalist, so he was one of the 3 finalists. But I guess what happened was when they sent those 3 from the journalist jury to the main panel people, they were like, I don't know, none of those are really working for us. What else do you have in the pile?
Can you believe that? Okay, seriously, but when does that happen? It's like these movies go to the Academy Awards and the Academy Award Committee comes back and says, you know what?
Not
I don't
so
think
much.
so. Let's go back to the drawing board, or let's go back. Oh my, so okay, how did they tell you that? Like what?
Okay, so that's a funny story too, right? So I guess I was in the top 10 when they showed it to the people and then they picked it, but I didn't, we said I didn't even know I was in the running. So I was covering a murder story that day. Remember the teenage love triangle story with the 2 girls and the boy? So I've been
interviewed on national news for that story. Right.
So so I was Rachel Wade, exactly.
Wade.
I was the on-call news reporter that day. We were doing weekly shifts. Like you get 3 weeks to be a feature writer and then a week to cover the news. So I was the on-call writer, and I'd gone to the horrible murder scene, and I was coming home and trying to type a story at home on deadline, and I was texting my friends and like, oh, did John win? Did we hear from John? Whatever. And then all of a sudden my dogs start barking like really loud, and I look out the front door and my editor's there, and I'm at my house, and I'm like, is he coming to spank me because I'm busting deadline here? Like my murder story's almost done, And I was so flustered, and I was trying to call the dogs off because they were jumping all over him, and so I went out on the deck with him, and I said, "Did John win? Did John win?" And he goes, "No, John didn't win." And then he put his hand on my shoulder and he goes, "But I have some news that might make you feel better. You won." And I was like, "What?" I fell down in the lawn chair. I was like, that was not even a possibility, which made it so much better because I wasn't anticipating,
right.
So he's there with the managing editor of the paper on my deck with my bad dogs jumping around and telling me I just won. And then he was like, "I'm going to need you to go finish that murder story."
Oh my gosh. So then did he tell you that that's what the board said that they wanted?
Because I was like, how did that happen? And there's a book of the Pulitzer Prize winners from going back to, I think it's 1908 or something, and my name has an asterisk, and I'm the only person with the asterisk because it says moved from contention by the board. So there's like a little footnote there that says like she didn't really be a finalist, but yeah.
So I mean, and I can only imagine, though, to have your editor and the managing editor, as you said, at your home to deliver this news. So, okay, so you hear that you win, not even anticipating, you're in the running. How did it feel? When were you presented? Walk us through that whole thing. Did you... what happened? Was there a ceremony? Or
Yeah, I think the first thing I did that day, this is 2008, right? So newspapers were taking a tank right there. And the first thing I did was I called my best friend who was the researcher on the story at the paper. I said, "Karen, they can't fire us now." It's like, they got to keep us another year here. So that was my first initial thought, was like, okay, now I can't get fired, maybe at least not this year. But they had a beautiful ceremony at Columbia University in New York. And I took the photographer as my date because she and I had worked so closely on that story together.
That was really sweet that you brought her as your date, because I'm sure
Yeah.
your husband, of course, would want to be there, but to bring the person on the journey.
Yeah,
with
she
you?
had been through
Yeah.
all of that with me the whole way. So we had fun in New York, and the paper bought a table at Tavern on the Green. Remember way back then?
Yes. Oh,
So we had this
absolutely.
big fancy dinner, and it was really special. And I called Danny and her family right away. Of course, to tell them.
What an
So
impact
I
this
don't
had.
know that they really knew what
Exactly
that was, what the
you know,
Pulitzer was, or what it meant. But yeah.
So let me ask, and these conversations are so fluid, and I told you I never script questions, and I never, it just goes. Was your dad alive when you won the Pulitzer, and did you have a chance?
Still are.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh. So okay, when
My biggest regret is I didn't bring my boys. They were like 10 and 12, and I wish I'd brought them.
to see that momentous occasion.
Yeah.
But when you told your dad that you won the Pulitzer Prize, and here's your dad reading to you while you're eating Cheerios as a 6-year-old, and clearly loves journalism, what was your dad's reaction?
I think I had to remind him how important he was in that decision, because he always credits my mom, the English teacher, as like, oh, you taught Lane how to write. You know what I mean? I had to, Daddy, you're the one who made me want to be a journalist. So it was very, very special. I brought them back a program, and they were very proud.
So amazing and wonderful. What advice would you have to young women out there, Lane, who want to pursue their dream? What advice would you give them?
I speak at an awful lot of journalism conferences and colleges, and I have not done one single talk where a young woman didn't say to me, can you be a mom and a journalist? And I think that would be the first thing I'd want to say. I mean, you're a mom too, right? You can do both. It's not easy, but I think that's the thing that I would like to say most is you can do both. You don't have to just give up everything to be a journalist or a career woman. You can have a family, you can have children. And it really enriched my kids' lives. Like my youngest son likes to tell the story, like, I told you I never knew what my dad did. I didn't understand it. But I brought home way too much of my stories to my children. I inundated them with that. And he tells people, like, I knew what a prostitute was when I was 5 because of Mom. Like, all right, you're welcome. But no, I think for advice, make your own way. If I had been the type of person that thought, oh, I should just go follow this path and be an editor, I would never have stayed in this business. I wouldn't have been happy doing that for 30 years. So, be stalwart about what it is that you want. Keep your eyes on the ultimate goal, but also be willing to do the little crappy stuff too. I think there's some younger reporters who come up feeling like, oh, I could just go tell these important projects all day long, and you gotta go cover some stupid school board meetings for a while. You know what I mean? You gotta go to a car accident every once in a while, and still being willing to do that. Like I covered the protests this summer, and I really didn't want to do that, but I felt like I can't be, one of the reporters not being out there on the streets while this all is happening. I still want to be part of the mix. You know what I mean? And I think coming up with your own ideas has been really monumental for me to get to do what I want to do. There's a lot of reporters who come in and just take whatever assignments there are and then complain about it. And it's like, no, come up with something better,
Be empowered and do it.
And do it, and do what you want to do. But you have to be able to convince the editor that. And you also have to, take one for the team every now and then and go out and sweat in the streets.
I love the advice you gave, because for the series, I'm asking all of you, what advice would you pass on? And it's something that you said that, because I remember I was afraid to become a mom because I thought it would affect my job.
Right.
And I was so worried about, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to anchor another show, or I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm going to be,
or I won't be a good mom because I'm so busy with my career.
It made me a better mom. It made me a better mom.
Absolutely.
And it made me a better journalist It made me a better journalist being a mom, because I could relate. And I knew what that love is. It's like when you met Danny and your son was the exact same age. You write better, you tell stories better. And
you feel more.
You feel more. You absolutely feel more. All right, my last question. If you could write, is there anything that you want to write now?
Oh my goodness. Oh, I think the world is so different now. I feel like my whole job has changed since COVID started, because I like to go immerse in somebody's world and be there face to face and be in their living room, in their kitchen. And so much of the stuff now is Zoom or FaceTime or stuff. So I'm working on a story I'm really excited about right now, because the whole summer of protests and Black Lives Matter and stuff, I kept thinking, who in the world wants to be a police officer? Like, who in their right mind would go into this profession at this time? So I'm embedded at the police academy
Wow.
with a class of 23 cadets who all signed up for this since COVID and decided for a variety of reasons they wanted to be a police officer. So that I'm kind of excited about that because I'm actually out there. I was at the academy all morning this morning when they were doing like shootout drills and stuff like that. And so that's been fun because I feel like it's newsy, it's timely and it's cultural, but it's also a really interesting people story. I have one young mother, an African-American woman who's got a 7-year-old son. I've got an NFL player who couldn't play because they knocked the NFL out, during COVID. There's a guy from the Army. There's another guy whose brother's been in jail his whole life and he wants to help. So such interesting motivations and backstories, and I think most of my stories, what I want them to do is like look at somebody, even if it's themselves or the world or their neighbor in a different way, And I think this has definitely made me see police in a different way, and I hope maybe it will help, like, readers understand, like, what's motivating these people and what goes into it,
I'm so looking forward to reading it. When is it coming out?
And they graduate the end of February.
Oh, it's okay.
So, yes, and not too long.
So that's so great.
It's been 6 months, yeah.
That's so great. Well, on the record, I'm going to say that people have asked me, I think I've told you, to write my life story. And if that ever happens, you would be my choice to write it.
Oh, my God, you're so sweet.
You're
I would be honored to write your story. Your story is amazing. Your story has all the things that I would want in a story I would write. You know what I mean?
I don't even know what to say to that because you're my inspiring woman. Lane DeGregory, thank you so much for being here. And that brings us to the end of another episode of On the Record. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. Thank you again for sharing your story. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. You can follow me on all my social media platforms, and you can subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. Until next time, stay safe.